Hello everyone and welcome back to another stream from Oman Talks NRL SuperCoach here for the round 26 trade targets and preview stream, although trade targets is probably a bit of a stretch given that most of us out there are probably running on no trades at all. So hopefully this is more of a preview stream, but look, if you have got trades up your sleeve, obviously it's head-to-head grand finals as well, then there hopefully going to be some use for you in this particular stream as we go through some of the best trade targets for the week. Hopefully we'll go through as well sit v starts and all that kind of good stuff as well, captaincy and whatnot. So good to see some people in the chat already. Lachlan says he got a 12.30 last week, which is brutal. Obviously there was a big round of scoring last week, and one thing we'll spend a lot of time in the stream actually is on just looking at the teams that are the ones to target, and it puts some more numbers behind it rather than just looking at kind of my draw difficulty matrix. I've actually done some number crunching as well ahead of this week, so hopefully some interesting stats for everyone out there. Jason Yang saying, Dewey completely ruined your rank. Yeah, that's very unfortunate. I feel bad, for people who went and traded in Dewey. I was very hot on him last week as well. I'm pretty sure I said he was my number one target over like RTS, and that was a humongous point swing of like 100 plus. And it's just the luck in the draw of SuperCoach, isn't it? Like Dewey getting that injury very early on, and then RTS obviously scoring 109 points. So unfortunately, these things do happen. I went okay last week, 14.34. I got bailed by, well, not bailed, but I've had Reece Walsh now for quite a few weeks. And, I remember at the beginning it was very bad because that was a week I got him and missed out on Edwards, who got 173. But since then, I haven't done the numbers, but I'd like to think that Walsh has out-averaged or outscored Edwards. And of course, Edwards is out for this week. So Walsh actually has in the end turned out to be like a decent trade-in. He's gone like really big in 3 of his last 4 games. So he's been a good trade-in. I captained him on the weekend, so he scored very well. So yeah, 14.34 for me. So I had a green arrow of like 850 spots. So my season rank is 3290. So look, it's not going to be that top 1,000 target that I generally do have. I have a fortnight left. I still have one trade in the bank, which I was always wanting to keep for round 27, just because Scott Drinkwater was on the bye, and I thought I can bring in anyone at the flex position, but might have to rethink that this week. I can field a full team this week but my team's not. It doesn't look great. And then I think given the way that restings occurred, Penrith will have their players back next round against the Dragons. So automatically, if you own a few Penrith players, your team's going to look a little bit stronger. I will get Eli Katoa back. Viliama Kikau is out for this week as well. Might get him back as well. So next week, my team actually might look a little bit better despite having Drinkwater on the bye. And so I might need to maybe make that trade this week to try to make a better team for this particular round. Lauren says, I'm cooked this week, mate. You're definitely not going to be you're not going to be the only person. There's a lot of people out there who are going to be really short of numbers this round. It's just unfortunate. And again, SuperCoach tried to mitigate against these mass restings and whatnot for head-to-head purposes by having these occur in the head-to-head grand finals happen in round 26. Because a few years ago, we were seeing round 27 was a round where we had a lot of restings. All the NRL coaches out there, well, Ivan Cleary and Craig Bellamy in particular, kind of thought, well, stuff that. Let's rest everyone in round 26 instead, or staggered restings as well. Like for Melbourne, they've rested a few players. I suspect players like Munster, Pappenhausen might get a rest next week, but let's see how that all plays out. In terms of TLT, let's dig into it. There's obviously heaps to talk about this round. So starting off with the Bulldogs versus Penrith Panthers, Kickout is out for the Bulldogs. I don't know what exactly it is. If anyone has any info on that, if it's a 1 week thing, because I may have missed something last week and I didn't watch the Bulldogs game, so I'm not actually sure if there's like a head knock or a concussion related thing. I don't think there is, but if anyone has any information on that, that would be good to know. But he's out for this week for the Bulldogs. So that wasn't a player I needed out after hearing about all of these Penrith restings, yesterday afternoon, the news was coming out. Josh Curran is in for him instead. Harry Hayes is also out. Shout out to the guy on Twitter who was saying, where's the Harry Hayes update? And his username was like Harry Hayes #1 fan or something along the lines. And I thought, yeah, the username checks out. He's also out as well for the Dogs. For Penrith, they rest pretty much their entire 17. I think Brad Schneider's the only one. So your Clearys, Zay Yos, your Brian To'os, your Dylan Edwards, all out this week. But with Penrith players, I think whether you want to trade him out this week, it really depends if you're overall or head-to-head. If you're overall focused, I'd be trying to hold on if I could, just given that they come back next week against the Dragons. If you're head-to-head focused though, and you're missing them this week, then I think obviously completely fine to sell to try and get in someone to help win your grand final matchup this week. Warriors and Eels are both 1-17, so not much happening there. Skin infection. Okay, there you go. It's a skin infection. Thank you for giving that clarity on Kickow. Benny G's in the chat as well that's saying, this game is so easy. I have to give a massive shout out to Benny G. I don't know what you updated to in the end, but 1,700 was what you scored pre-updates. And I saw your team as well on X. You have a team of 20 this round. What the hell? You've gotten Sanders Smith. You purposely nuffed out at hooker. Yet in the week when everyone has got the carnage, you've gotten Sanders Smith at hooker, and you've got other depth as well in your team. So, mate, you're doing very well. Your fullbacks are Walsh, Teddy, and Turbo. They're probably the best 3 fullbacks you can maybe have, arguably with Drinkwater in that. Mate, so Benny G's sitting pretty. And let me know what you're ranked at, Benny, because I'd love to know what kind of a green arrow you got. 17-10 in the end. So, yeah, you would have got a huge green arrow with a score like that. Nah, props to you, man. That was awesome to see. Warriors Eels 1-17. For Melbourne, so Grant is out suspended again. Another thing to add for the carnage, he's out for the next 2 weeks, so he'll be out for the rest of the Supercoach season. And then you've got Eli Katoa, Xavier Coates, and Nick Meaney all rested. Kane Bradley, our saviour, Lord and Saviour on the wing. Just sitting there is enough, waiting to come in at the crucial moment in this game against the Roosters at home, coming into our teams on the wing. Hopefully scores more than 30. For the Roosters themselves, Tupou is back, but Sam Walker is out with a head knock. So Sanders Smith is in at 5'8", and Hugo Savala went to halfback. You've got Tamale is in for Xavier Savage for the Raiders, so he's back after his lengthy layoff. We'll talk about the Raiders players in particular in a little bit later. Adam Dewey's out again, more carnage, right? Like it just such bad luck that he got that. I think it was like cheekbone, eye socket, all these fractures. So he's out for the rest of the Supercoach season. So Latu Fainu takes his spot at halfback. Stafford Toa is in for Brett Naden. So that's actually a good thing to mention because Stafford Toa in for Brett Naden is going to be an improvement on that edge for the Tigers. You saw at the back end of that game against the Cowboys how many points they leaked on that side. So that's probably going to mean that edge is a little bit better defensively. Jaden Sewer, DeBellin, and Harm Saleh are all back for the Dragons. So that Dragons team doesn't look as weak. So, people who are piling into Manly this week, Dragons coming off such a bad loss to the Rabbitohs, having these 3 players back, may expect a bit of a bounce back from them. So I look at the Dragons obviously as a good matchup, but for this week, they may potentially want to kind of correct what they did from last week. Cowboys are also 1-17. The Broncos were fairly stable. I think I can't even remember what the movement was. I think it was just something related on their bench. But Adam Reynolds is in the reserve. So, maybe there's a chance he comes in this week, which would take the goal kicking back off of Reece Walsh. Given that it was a hamstring, maybe they don't risk it with Reynolds. Even if he plays, maybe he doesn't goal kick. So, not necessarily sure I'd let that stop you from getting a Reece Walsh this week if you're interested. I would think that maybe there's a chance he keeps the goal kicking, just given that it was a hamstring that Adam Reynolds had. For the Sharks, very much a team that we can target for the final 2 rounds. KL Iro is back for them, so he had a very lengthy layoff with his pec injury. So he's back for them, so it could be an ultimate point of difference play at your centre position. So Talakai's moved to the bench. Cam McInnes is out for the remainder of the year with that ACL, so Jesse Colquhoun moves into the lock position. For the Knights, 1-17, so Greg Marzu's 18th man. Maybe there's a chance that he gets onto the wing for the final team. Cody Nikorima is back for the Dolphins and Jake Averillo to centre, and Titans 1-17. So kind of all the carnage is happening in the earlier games, as you can see, towards the back end of the round and those teams. Nothing overly major happening there. So yeah, obviously lots and lots to consider for this week. And yeah, we're just missing so many players. You're ranked 425 after that score, Benny G, with a 1,100 jump. That is awesome. And Mr. Callio, shout out to you as well, sitting 136th. Sanders Smith or Purdy this week is my burning decision. If that's to play, that's a tough one. I'd probably argue that I'd rather prefer to play that Cowboys player, to be honest, just because it's Melbourne away for Sanders Smith. But what I wanted to get into first, of course, this is head-to-head grand final week, but we want to keep things also focused on overall if we can. So what I thought I'd do is do some number crunching. And, a few weeks ago, we spoke a lot about what are the rounds in the year where you see the biggest scores, and very evidently it was the back half of the season and pretty much from round 20, round 21 onwards when you start seeing teams who just have no motivation and things to play for. And we're seeing obviously last week Turbo scored 180, Walsh went close to 150. The week before that, you had Walsh go 155, Drinky 150, Hines 145. The week before that, Teddy 189. So you can see there's a trend in the last few rounds of the big 100+ point scores. So what I did was I looked at from rounds 21 to 23, so 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. So basically the last 5 rounds of the year, who has scored the 100+ point games, and what opposition have they scored against, just to identify the trends of who are the type of players who are getting these big scores, and also who are the teams that we should really be targeting, because these are the guys who are conceding the big 100+ point scores. Now, of course, there's going to be a lot of guys scoring in the 90s and whatnot. That could also change some of this, but I didn't want to go too far into it. I had to do this all manually, so I just stuck to 100+ point scores, given that that's the big ones that we're trying to chase. So a lot of number crunching went into this one. I think I won't try to read every single name in detail, but what you can see below me is a summary of the teams and how many times they've conceded 100+ point scores in the last 5 rounds. So I think it's pretty clear. The top 2 teams are the Dolphins and the Knights. So the Dolphins have conceded 11 100+ point scores in the last 5 weeks. And of course, a lot of that was from last round where Turbo Lehigh went 180, 160. I think one thing with the Dolphins as well is that they've conceded the most. They've also conceded the biggest. Like last week, 181.60. The week before that, 155 for Walsh, which was the top score. Teddy, 189. Round 22, I'm pretty sure they weren't on the bye. They conceded 106 to the DWZ. The week before that, I think they were on the bye. So there's a very clear thing. It's the fullbacks. So Teddy, Walsh, and Turbo all have gone absolutely huge against the Dolphins in the last 3 weeks. And the Dolphins have conceded the most 100+ point scores in the last 5 rounds. So they're definitely a team to target that should be factoring into your thinking. Now, they play the Titans this week. So if you're a head-to-head grand final player, you look at these and say, well, actually the Dolphins is who I want to target, but the Titans themselves can be a little bit hot and cold. So how do you know reliably, what player or backing that particular team? But this is just what the numbers suggest. And the next are the Knights. You can clearly see that the Knights have kind of given up on this season. So they've conceded a lot of 100+ point scores. That's 9 over the last 5 rounds. And fairly big ones as well. Last week, they conceded 147 to Walsh. The week before that, 151 to Drinky. The week before that, there was Cleary 104 to 102. And then a couple of rounds before that, in round 21, they conceded 134 to Matt Timoko. So there is a trend in the last couple of rounds as well of fullbacks. So fullbacks have done well against the Knights. Other outside backs or halves like Cleary have done well in round 22. And then the third bronze medal went to Manly. So Manly have conceded 8 100+ point scores in the last 5 rounds. They conceded 1 last week to Jerry Marshall King of 104. In round 24, they conceded 111 to Adam Dewey. In round 23, they conceded 127 to Ethan Strange. Nothing in round 22. And then in round 21, they conceded 137 to Karaz, 129 to Tracy, 124 to Matt Burton. So I think with Manly, what I've noticed is that a lot of these bigger scores happened kind of round 21, 22, 23, a little bit less so in the last couple of rounds. So while the numbers say that Manly is maybe a good opposition to target, the last couple of weeks they haven't been as bad. So I don't rate them as highly in terms of a team that I absolutely want to be targeting, as much as I do say the Dolphins or the Knights. Just to round out that, you've also then got the Titans who've conceded 6, Warriors who've conceded 5, which I thought was a bit surprising because we think of the Warriors as a good defensive team, but they still do have a tendency to concede big points on their day. And then it's the Dragons and the Rabbitohs and Penrith actually tied with 4. Very clear, you can see that there is one team that hasn't conceded any 100+ point scores in the last 5 rounds. That's the Raiders. They haven't conceded any. Roosters, Melbourne and Parramatta have only conceded 1. Bulldogs only twice. So they're already teams I'm looking at as, ideally you can avoid them. Melbourne is maybe a little bit different if they're resting players this week and next week, but Parramatta, Roosters, Bulldogs, they're looking pretty good defensively. And I'm definitely looking at the Dolphins and the Knights as 2 teams to be targeting. And in terms of trends of what positions, fullbacks absolutely is where you can see these big 100+ point scores. Your outside backs, so Lehigh last week. The week before that, you had Fige from the Dragons. The week before that, you had Ethan Strange, Sam Walker in the halves. Week before that, you had Brimson fullback. You had Staggs in the centers, Campbell, halfback. Very rarely are you seeing the forwards. This is all outside backs on the screen here. So I think this is where, again, you all probably know this if you're watching in round 26. You know that outside backs have the biggest ceilings. But it was really good just to look at this and really see that apart from maybe a couple of hookers, everyone is really outside backs, fullbacks mainly, halfbacks, and then some center wings. They're the ones who are spiking the big 100+ point scores. So I really think that that's where you want to be prioritizing. Lachlan says, cracking analysis. Appreciate that. Thank you very much. It took a bit of time this afternoon to put this together, but it was good. And Benny G says, I expect Parramatta to be red in defense. I haven't got them red in my color coding just because I didn't have time to update it. But very clearly you can see that this is, you don't look at Parramatta and say, actually, this is a great team to be targeting. And so to kind of summarize all of that, what I've just got on screen here is the draw for the next 2 weeks. And then the middle table that you can see here, which has got team and then count. That's effectively just counting up the number of 100+ point scores to try to see what teams actually really stand out in terms of their next 2 opponents. You've got Parramatta, Titans, Raiders, Sharks, Warriors, Manly, kind of in your top 6 or 7. And then the way I've broken that down separately even more was if you're a head-to-head player, so if you're just looking at this week, who are the teams I'd be looking at investing in? Titans would be one. So if you don't own like a Jaden Campbell at this point and you're in a head-to-head grand final, I think he's a really, really good pickup this week. If you want to go a bit point of difference, we saw how many points Dolphins have conceded to fullbacks and, big points as well. AJ Brimson could be a nice little point of difference in your 5'8" slot or maybe in center. And then I've got Sharks next because the Sharks are head-to-head. They've got who do the Sharks have? They've got the Knights this week, we spoke about as pretty much the second worst. So again, Nico Hines, close to must-have, I think, if you're in a head-to-head grand final, because he's probably going to be one of the highest captain players this round. And shout out to the SE Ballers as well, because they've also done their projections updated for today. And Hines has got the highest projected points of the round. So Hines definitely stands out. And then you've got your other point of differences, Mulatalo, Iro, Hiroti. I wouldn't necessarily go as far as say Will Kennedy, but Sharks outside backs can definitely do well. Even a Blake Brayley is a good shout. Then I've got the Broncos for head-to-head grand final. Now the Cowboys didn't rank that badly when it came to the conceding 100+ points, but the Broncos I just looked at because they're playing so well in the last few weeks. Obviously they're scoring lots of points. So your Reece Walsh, Dean Mariner, Tony Staggs really do stand out. Then I've got Manly. So Manly with the Dragons this week. So the Dragons have conceded 400+ point scores in the last 5 weeks, but they haven't conceded that huge kind of 150, 160. That's really just been dominated by the teams who've conceded these big 140+ scores really has been, the Dragons did, to be fair, in round 21, but in recent weeks, it's been the Dolphins, it's been the Knights, it's been the Cowboys and the Titans. Those are the 4 teams really that I'm looking at. So I think you're probably safe to target those particular teams. If you're overall focused and you're looking at the next 2 weeks, Titans still come out as number 1 for me because they've got the Dolphins this week and then the Tigers. Tigers haven't really considered that many 100+ point scores, but it's a round 27 game, so it's the last game of the year. It's a home game for the Titans, so they could do well there. The Raiders, I'm a little bit cautious on, even though they've got Tigers and Dolphins, just in terms of do they maybe rest players in round 27. They've had a couple of buys since Origin, so hopefully they don't because they have already had a couple of weeks to rest up a little bit. But if, for example, you get a full lineup against the Dolphins in round 27 and the Dolphins are out of it, they're not going to make the top 8, Raiders could have an absolute field day. It's in a away game, but the Raiders could be good for round 27 if you're more overall focused. I think the Sharks have got a very tough round 27 against the Dogs, but the Dogs could be kind of locked into a top 4 at that point in time, so they maybe they rest players as well. For head-to-head grand final purposes, I think Sharks, I'd almost leapfrog Titans as my number 1 team to be targeting because they've got the Knights and they're probably a much more reliable team themselves than the Titans, and they're playing at home, coming off a bye. Sharks for me feels really like the team I'd want to be targeting this week if you're a head-to-head grand final player. Warriors looks good against Parramatta and Manly. We just spoke about Parramatta maybe not being as good. Manly's decent, so that's kind of okay, but maybe nothing spectacular. Then I've got the Tigers because they have, who do they have? They've got the Raiders this week, so they're not good for head-to-head grand final, but they've got the Titans in round 27. So someone like a Taylor May could be a nice little play at center wing. So hopefully that kind of helps if you're focused on head-to-head or if you're focused on overall. That's going to guide a lot of my discussion around what players I prefer this week. And we're going to balance the topic of restings and stuff and what teams rest and whatnot. So I'll leave this on screen for a little bit, see if there's any questions just around who's considered the most 100+ point scores. But like for me, for example, if I make a trade this week, it basically means I'm going to be looking at outside backs, I won't trade at fullback because I've got Walsh, Teddy, and Drinkwater. So don't need to trade any of those guys this week. I'm not a head-to-head focused player as well. I'll caveat that too. So I'm more focused on overall. I've got Garrick sitting there in my centre, so he's still someone I can move on. I've got Munster and King Tonga at 5'8". Munster's playing this week. There's a chance that Munster rests next week, so maybe I instead go King Tonga out, get someone at 5'8". Maybe Ethan Strange could be an option. AJ Brimson could be an option as well. So that's kind of who I'm looking at, but really is focusing on outside backs, and as much as I possibly can, focus on teams like Titans, Sharks, maybe the Raiders as well. That's kind of where I'm thinking in terms of my particular trades. Sorry, 1 second. Got that on the wrong screen. Just going to see if there's any questions in the chat at the moment. So Wog Mema says, in my second consecutive final, looking for my first ring, who should I reserve out of Karapani, King Tonga, or Sandon? So I think just based on what we've spoken about, Sandon probably wouldn't be who I'd be playing. This week it's away against Melbourne. Even though Melbourne don't have Harry Grant, and if they're resting a few key stars, they still have Munster, they still have Pappy, Bronson Garlick's coming in. I think the team is still solid. So Sandon Smith, I don't even know if Sandon will goal kick. Savala might goal kick instead of him. So I probably wouldn't play Sandon. Out of Karapani and King Tonga with Manly at home, Karapani against the Cowboys, I think just based on how Broncos are going, I would probably go Karapani. And let's make use of the ball up projections, which fantastic resource as well. So Karapani's projected this week for 59.9. King Tonga is projected for 50.8. And then who was the other one? Sandon Smith, 56.5. So I think it's close between Sandon and Karapani, but yeah, I would play Karapani, I think, just based on those matchups. Yeah, and you're leaning with Karapani anyway. Yeah, I think Karapani is definitely where I'd be going. Marky, yeah, look, I couldn't, mate, for the purposes of the graphic, Mr. Callio, I couldn't fit in Nwangani Tuasi, so I just called him Marky, just to make it easier. Alrighty, Benny G says, Iro is the guy, man. Bring in Iro. I have spent your trade already. There you go. So yeah, no, I mean, to be fair, against the Knights this week, and the thing with the Knights and Iro in particular, a lot of the damage that the Broncos were doing last week was on that right edge of the Knights, because that's the side where I think they've got Dom Young, and was it Fletcher Hunt or someone who's not coming to my mind, but it's not as experienced as their left edge, which has got Brabham Best, because that's definitely the side you want to be targeting. And the Sharks have always had that left center spot be their hot zone this year. Iro absolutely could be awesome, and I think he's projected for like 77 points this week. Sam says, who's the top projections for baller? For this round, it is Nico Hines. So Hines has got, we're kind of getting into the early captaincy chat, but yeah, 103 points for Nico. That fully checks out in my opinion. It's a home game off a bye coming up against those Knights who are looking terrible. Then you've got Reece Walsh, 92.9. Then you've got Turbo with 89.2. So they're kind of the top three, and absolutely, I think if you're looking at captaincy, those are the three I'd be looking at for this particular week. And look, sometimes the projected points obviously aren't going to be quite so accurate. You know, last week, for example, Teddy only scored 40 and he was projected very highly. But in general, they're a good measuring stick of the guys who will generally do best. Like, for example, last week, Reece Walsh was projected, I think, for 91, and I think Turbo was 86. Obviously, they well exceeded that. But I guess where they sat in terms of the rankings of all players, it was generally pretty much on the money, barring Tedesco, in terms of their projected points or projected position in terms of how they'd score relative to everyone else in the round. So the projected points are really, really good. They're fairly accurate because they use like 5 years worth of data, take into account all sorts of things around these positional analysis, weather conditions and whatnot. So I find them really, really useful, and they're really good as well because they'll look at the team lists and bump up players accordingly. Like, for example, this week, Bulldogs versus Penrith. If Penrith had played a full 17 of their strongest squad, you wouldn't probably expect Carras to have an 82.9 projected points, or Connor Tracy 82.4, Lockie Galvin 80. But they can see the team that Penrith has put out, and that can feed into the projections as well. So that Carras actually does bump up quite a lot to 82.9. Gagai 83.3. Look, I'm not quite sure what numbers they're getting to suggest that, if I'm being honest, because I don't know if Gagai is going to score 83 this week against the Sharks. But look, I have him in my team. Good to know, because I was thinking, can I sit him this week? But if I have to play him against the Sharks, he might turn out to be okay. But yeah, Nico Hines stands far and away above 103. And yeah, look, spoiler alert, he's probably going to be my captain for this week as well. And I really like the look of the Sharks players. So a couple of questions did come in on my Patreon around like who's just like the best person to buy this week. Look, again, it's position dependent. If you're looking in halves, like say head-to-head grand final, you don't have Nico Hines, you're selling Cleary. Cleary to Hines, I think, absolute no-brainer. If you're looking in your fullback, Reece Walsh versus Turbo, there's going to be a discussion about which of these two, would you want to get. And more, I think there's more questions actually around, would you sell like Drinky to one of them? Would you sell Teddy to one of them? If you're head-to-head, I can get around selling someone like Tedesco. He's projected for 80.2, but I think we can see that Walsh and Turbo have got better matchups this week. Even Drinkwater to one of them, I don't hate it. Drinkwater, I'd feel less comfortable because it is the last game for the Cowboys this year. They've got the bye next week, so this is effectively their last game. They're playing at home. It's a Queensland rival. So Drinky out, if you're a head-to-head player, I'm not as convinced on compared to, say, Teddy. Look, Teddy can still do well this week because with no Sam Walker, we know that he'll command more of the ball. So Teddy's not a must-sell. But if you're in your head-to-head and you're looking at your fullbacks thinking, oh God, if I need a match like a Walsh or if I need a match like a Turbo, I completely understand it. And in terms of which of the two I'd be looking at, it's a real tough one. I think the numbers between the Dragons and the Cowboys was similar in terms of number of 100-plus point scores conceded. My gut still leans maybe Walsh. I know Turbo went nuclear last week and outscored Walsh, who played very, very well. But I think Walsh has more consistently been hitting these hundreds in the last few weeks. Should, I think, still keep the goal kicking. And I think the Broncos, both the Broncos and Manly have things to play for because the Broncos are trying to consolidate a top 8 position. Manly are trying to get into the top 8. But I look at the Dragons this week away. I think they can have a bit of a bounce back potentially after coming off a pretty bad loss against the Rabbitohs. The Cowboys just had a good win, so maybe they're going to be a little bit more down this week. And the Broncos have been playing very well. So I think I'd slightly edge Walsh over Turbo. And the projections kind of suggest that as well. Now, if you're looking at center options for this week, which I am, because I think I'm leaning more and more towards using my last trade this week and selling Garrick, just to try to strengthen my squad this round, because I'm playing some pretty mediocre players. Like I'm playing Kane Bradley for what it's worth this week. I've pretty much got a full 18, but nothing else. So I'm looking at maybe Garrick out, and I'm looking at a center option this week because, chasing the high upside, etc. Sharks is where my focus went immediately, just given the Knights. Bulldogs next week isn't fantastic, but if the Bulldogs rest players next week, then maybe it's not that bad of a matchup. If we're comparing players, I think, Iro could be a good shout. He's just coming back off a pec injury. I wouldn't expect a pec injury to be one that kind of affects his performance or output, since coming back. It's been he might just not be match fit, I guess, but prior to his injury where he scored only 41 points in that game, 103, 77, 84, 71, 61, 85, 111, 65. So super rock solid. He scored a couple of tons as well. He would be my preferred pick out of your Sharks players. I think Hiroti and Mulatalo's got 77 projected points this week as well. So he's got a chance of going big this week as well. I do think that if I was going to get either of the two, like say if you're in a head-to-head, kind of depends what you need because they play second last game of the round. If you need someone to go 150, I would say that Mulatalo is more likely to get that just by virtue of playing on the wing. The safer option though is probably Iro, because Mulatalo has scored 3 tons already this year and he scored a 98 and a 91. So he's definitely got some upside in him as well. Iro's probably going to be much more solid. But, in terms of the 5-round base power, Mulatalo's has been 48. So it's pretty good. Hiroti, I think, if you're looking for Sharks, maybe players, but a little bit cheaper, Hiroti's probably your one at 436k. Rod McGrath says Stephen Crichton or Connor Tracy for the head-to-head grand final. Absolutely, these guys could be options. Let's have a quick look at their projected points. So Stephen Crichton is projected for 74.4 and Tracy was actually for 82. Now, I think if I was going one of the two this week, I'd probably just favour Critter. Given that he's got the goal kicking, I just feel a bit more comfortable with that. Tracy's probably got a bigger ceiling because Tracy's gone like 130. I think he went 130 back in round 21, wasn't it? Yeah, 129 against Manly in round 21. Stephen Crichton, I don't think I won't say he's not capable of it. He's definitely capable of scoring something like that. But I think it's more likely that Tracy gets a bigger score. Crichton's got the goal kicking, though, as a bit of a safety net. So again, it depends how you're going. I mean, they play the very first game of the round, so I guess it doesn't really matter so much. But just thinking about it, my inclination actually would be Connor Tracy. I think I always do generally prefer the fullbacks. Fullbacks are more likely going to go bigger than your centers or your wingers. So I think Tracy would be the one out of those two. In saying that, though, I prefer Iro. I think I'd go Iro above maybe Tracy. Then maybe I'd go Tracy, Mulatalo. There's a bunch of other centers on the screen here. Taylor May, Tuivasa-Sheck, Kula, Hopewati, Matt Timoko, Brimson, Tony Staggs, and Dean Mariner. Just on the Broncos players very quickly, I think the Broncos players are completely fine for head-to-head. Their projected points are a little bit lower, 59 and 62. I think if Melbourne had not rested all of their players this week, then I would be much more keen on them from an overall point of view, because what you're more likely going to get would be Cowboys this week and then a weakened Melbourne next week. I think what's going to happen, though, is that they're going to have Cowboys this week and then a Melbourne team that rests some players, but not everyone. So that matchup doesn't look as good as maybe it could have. So I'm a little bit more off of the Broncos players, but they are in insane form at the moment. Like Tony Staggs' 3-round average is 85. Dean Mariner scored a ton on the weekend. I'm pretty sure he scored a ton only 2 weeks ago as well. So he's had a couple of hundreds in his last 3 rounds. Tony Staggs, though, has been on absolute fire. I do think this particular week against the Cowboys, the left edge is where I'd prefer to go, just given that that's where the Tigers conceded a lot of their points, although Stafford Toll coming in should help things a little bit. But Brimson is actually someone who caught my eye. Now, that's probably a lot of data from the Dolphins conceding so many points to fullbacks and just so many big tons. I think if I was a head-to-head player this week in a grand final, more point of difference absolutely is Iro. If I arguably had to say more upside, though, I think it would be Brimson. So Iro's projected for 77, or actually I had the projected points on the screen, sorry. Brimson's projected for 73, Iro 77. So numbers slightly favour Iro, which I can't knock just because the Dolphins are still a decent team. They've just been leaking a lot of points to fullbacks, whereas the Knights look dead and buried and the Sharks are a better team than the Titans. So that's a very tough one. It's a bit of a flip of the coin between Iro and, say, Brimson. They're kind of the top two here in projected points outside of Mulatalo. So I haven't fully made my mind up on which one of those two I would go. Again, if I lean into the thinking of generally preferring fullbacks, maybe Brimson, but it's a real coin toss between the two, so I'm not too sure. I would prefer Brimson and Iro, I think, to Connor Tracy, Mulatalo, and Stephen Crichton. Guys like RTS, I think just based on how Parramatta are defending in the last few weeks, head-to-head grand final purposes, I don't love it. And then I think you probably got the best game. You missed the best game, which was probably last week. Now that against the Titans, now they've got Parramatta and Manly. I don't look at either of those two and think, okay, those are absolute slam dunk matchups. So I think RTS for me, I probably now wouldn't go in and buy new. Probably would be someone from the Sharks instead, or maybe even the Titan like a Brimson. Of course, you can go Beau Fermor. He's rock solid, won't let you down. Phil Sammy can let you down. He scored in the 20s last week. And I think Brimson, is a bit more consistent, 5-round average of 77. So I think he's more likely going to get you those kind of 70-plus point scores. Matt Timoko could be very interesting from an overall point of view. He's got a 5-round average of 88, but he costs a pretty penny. He's 746k. So I think if you don't have that money in the bank, then obviously you can't get to him. I would almost prefer, though, Kale Iro instead, just as a bit of a ultra point of difference. Alrighty, let's see if there's any other questions. Yeah, Crichton with the kicking, but again, even Crichton with the kicking, he's not someone who I typically associate as scoring these big kind of 150 scores. I don't know what his biggest score is ever in SuperCoach, but I don't normally consider him. He's got 111, 104, and 100 earlier this year. Look, Penrith looked pretty weak, obviously. But yeah, I don't know. There's something just in my head thinking that even with goal kicking, I don't know if Critter's going to go get that 130, 140. But I feel like someone like a Brimson could do that. I think Brimson is more likely of a ceiling, or maybe one of your Sharks outside backs as well, because we saw a lot of those we saw Hiroti, Mulatalo, and Katoa all go for 100 plus against the Titans the week before they had their bye. Taylor May with Canberra this week, of head-to-head purposes, I don't think he probably suits. Titans maybe around 27, he could be an option, but I think last week was probably a better week to get him when he did have the Cowboys. On the Manly players, in Kula and Hopewadi, obviously they've both gone absolutely huge in the last week. Hopewadi in particular with 160, so big 3-round averages and 5-round averages for the pair of them. Look, Dragons and Warriors, I think is actually, positionally wise, is very, very good for both of these players because the Warriors have conceded a lot of points to opposing left edge. So if you have a look at the matchup analysis here, so the Warriors have conceded 18 tries to left wingers and 11 tries to left centers. And they've had this deficiency on that edge pretty much all season long. So both of those players could profit playing on that left edge against the Warriors. That's in round 27. And then round 26 against the Dragons. The Dragons have conceded, where is it here? 11 tries to opposing left wingers, 13 to fullback. So again, someone like a Turbo swooping out the back could do very well this week against the Dragons. So look, I'm not going to discount them. I do prefer Manly players. I think these guys in particular to your Broncos players, just based on draw. I would probably also now prefer them over an RTS, just based on draw as well. So it's kind of hard to give like blanket rankings because it's so based on head-to-head or overall focused. I think if I'm buying for head-to-head, so just looking at this week, I think Sharks have to be where I'd be leaning first. So probably would be an Iro. Then probably would be like a Brimson. Then you can maybe throw in your Mulatalos, your Hirotis. Then you could maybe look at your, who did I say before? It was, who was it? Sorry, I'm completely blanking. Maybe it was the Manly players or the Broncos players, but I'd probably rate those other guys ahead. If you're overall focused, then I think I like Brimson a bit more, just given the next 2 weeks. I like the Manly players a little bit more, in particular Kula and Hopewadi, just because of the Warriors. Like, if you saw before, the Warriors have conceded more 100-plus point scores in the last 5 rounds than the Dragons, than the Rabbitohs. So on their day, they can concede these big scores as well. But yeah, Dolphins and Knights are the two that I'm really looking at. So I'm kind of just thinking of anyone who plays these two, which could be Timoko in round 27, but I think he's so expensive, it's hard to get there. So yeah, that's kind of some of my thoughts on the centers. Hopefully that helped. I know I was a little bit all over the shop. And if anyone's listening on audio, I think I definitely recommend in this particular episode you go to YouTube because we showed up the graphics of who's considered the most 100-plus point scores, and I'm trying to keep that going through the majority of the stream. Sam says, would you match Lehigh or go to pod? Look, I think you can. I mean, look, it depends on how your game or your matchup is going. I think you can go against Lehigh for head-to-head this week. Against the Dragons away, there wasn't anything in there that screamed he's going to go really big this week. Whereas I think you could go against him with someone like a Mulatalo or an Iro on that left edge for the Sharks. Or you could even go Brimson against the Dolphins. I think you could probably go against Lehigh if you wanted to this week. And in terms of the price difference, I mean, Hopewadi is pretty cheap. He's $464K. But if you've got the money to get up to an Iro or a Brimson, I'd do that. If you don't have the money, then maybe you can consider matching, or maybe you can get on like a Dean Mariner, who's $480K, so a little bit more affordable around that Hopewadi price. Oh yeah, you've asked, would you go Iro as a pod? Yeah, we've kind of hopefully answered that question. We'll take some questions now off the cuff. Mr. Kelly saying, what's Purdue's baller projection? Who's he running at again? So Purdue is projected for 52.4 points. He'll be running at the right edge of the Broncos. So he'll be running at, oh God, who is it? Is it Jordan Ricky? Or has Jordan Ricky been playing left? Maybe it's a Jordan Ricky, Tony Staggs. He'll be running at Staggs and Mariners edge. So they're not bad defensively. So yeah, that's kind of who Purdue would be running at. And yeah, projected for 52.4 points. Jack saying Drinky or Turbo for head-to-head finals. Let's quickly jump onto the fullback. So projected points this week for the fullbacks. Drinkwater is on 80 versus the Broncos. Turbo's on 89 versus the Dragons. Look, this week, projected points say Turbo. Matchup analysis also says Turbo in my opinion, because we just saw it before. The Dragons have conceded 13 tries to opposing fullbacks. That's the most of any team. Plus, they have this tendency to also concede points to their left and the right wing. which is most teams anyway. But given that they've conceded on their wings and to fullbacks, it just feels like a week for Turbo. If you look at Drinkwater, the Broncos have conceded on their wings, but similar numbers to the Dragons. And also the Broncos are just way more informed than the Dragons. So I think absolutely if I was going Drinkwater or Turbo this week in head-to-head, Turbo would be the one for me. And I think we spoke about it a little bit. If you're overall focused, I don't hate selling Drinkwater this week because he has the bye next week. You can maybe get a week ahead. If you just feel like I need to get Walsh or Turbo and captain them one of them this week, I don't mind moving off of Drinkwater early. Head-to-head wise, I get it because I think you need to try to win and try to get that edge, and it could work out for you. But, Drinkwater is not a bad hold. He scored 100 plus on the weekend anyway. Out of Bradley and Iro, who do you think is a better trade? And if I take Iro, Sandon has to play. 100% Iro. Sandon, Brayley. Sorry, I don't know why. I thought Brayley and I read it as Kane Bradley. And I was like, why would you be asking between Kane Bradley and Kale Iro? Surely that's night and day. Brayley and Iro makes a little bit more sense. So Brayley's projected points is 72, Iro 77. Look, I think between the two of them, I would probably still go Iro just because of matchup. And I think the fact that outside backs, we saw it, are more likely to go and score bigger tons this year. Not just this year, but most Supercoach years anyway. So yeah, for me, definitely would be getting an Iro ahead of Brayley if that's what you're deliberating between. Lachlan says, it definitely makes sense to sell Dewey to Iro / another centre over Edwards to Walsh, right? Final trade then on Drinking next week. Yes, I think so. So Lachlan, if you're, by the sound of it, you're a bit of an overall player, then yes, I think holding on to Edwards is fine because he'll come back to the Dragons next week. And so I think you'll want him for that particular matchup. Dewey's out for the rest of the year. So you can get someone who you like for the next 2 weeks. And it sounds like if you have got the trades to sell Drinkwater anyway next week, then what you can do is just find, you might cop it a little bit this week in terms of not having one of Walsh or Turbo. But if the money works, which it should because Edwards is 824k. To be fair, Walsh has got a negative 31 break even and he's 815k. But you can just get a free crack then next week with Drinkwater, assuming you've got 3 fullbacks, so you can trade to anyone at flex. It just gives you flexibility next week. You can just trade to whoever you want. It doesn't have to be a fullback. You can go halfback maybe instead, but more likely you're going to get another fullback. Dewey out, I think, to a centre. And then next week you can do Drinkwater to Walsh or Turbo or whoever you want, to be honest. You could take a bit of a flyer on someone else if you wanted to. Alrighty, let's see if there's other questions. Drinky or Turbo? Yeah, okay, sorry, we already covered that one. So yeah, I think on the fullbacks, if you're a head-to-head player, I understand maybe wanting to move Teddy on to a Walsh or a Turbo this week. Drinky, I can also get behind that. And I think based on what we said before, I'd slightly have Walsh ahead of Turbo, just given that he's got the goal kicking. And I think form-wise is going a little bit better. Although Turbo's Turbo, 180 last week without breaking a sweat pretty much. But I think a lot of that was also due to the Dolphins. I just have this feeling that the Dragons will bounce back this week. Whereas the Cowboys, while it's their last game of the year, that was a big win for them last week against the Tigers, that comeback win. So part of me also just thinks about where the team's mindset is going to be at. Manly have just had the big win. Are they going to do the same thing again against a team who just had an embarrassing loss? They're getting 3 decent players in terms of Jaden Sewer, Harm Saleh, and who was the other person they're getting back? Jack DeBellin. And the Dragons are also playing at home. I just feel like Cowboys were more likely going to let in a big score than maybe the Dragons would, although that could be absolutely famous last words. Will Penrith players get rested next week too? I doubt it, Lawrence. I doubt it. I think Penrith will name a full team next week. The reason they've done this is because because they lost last week, they're out of the running for the top 4. So I think Ivan Cleary just said, look, we can't get top 4. We'll give you all the rest this week, and then we'll give you next week against the Dragons to get you at least a game in the run into finals so that you've got a bit of rhythm. I'd be very doubtful that Penrith players get arrested next week. Alrighty, how are we going for time? It's already been 47 minutes and I've just been yapping away, but those are some of the biggest topics we wanted to cover. I know Centaur is a little bit all over the shop, but hopefully people still found some use out of that. for hookers, because we need to talk about some of the trade ins and outs. So I'm just going to quickly bring that up on my screen. And guys, please give the stream a like as well if you've enjoyed it so far. So Harry Grant is the number one most traded out player this week. And in terms of the most common trades, you've got Grant to Brayley, Grant to Jeremy Marshall-King are two of the most common trades. And if we look at trades in the top 5%, actually trades in the top 5%, Edwards to Walsh is the most common trade, which I can understand just to get if you've got the ability to do another trade again next week to bring Edwards back, you can totally do that. Otherwise, Edwards for Walsh this week, I think makes a lot of sense. Edwards to Turbo, people also doing. If you are trading Grant out this week and you're looking for a hooker, you've got Marshall King, Brayley, Appy Coruscant, and Sam Verrills are the options that I wanted to talk about. Appy, because he's now got the goal kicking back, given that Dewey's out. He's actually got the best projected points this week as well, of 73, and that's against the Canberra Raiders. So who knows how he could score in the final week against the Titans. So I think if you're in that camp, then someone like Appy Coruscant could be like a real point of difference this week. Raiders isn't great. They haven't conceded the big ton to anyone in the last 5 weeks, but maybe it happens in round 27 for Appy. Marshall King with the Titans and then the Raiders. Look, he's the one that I think, or Brayley's actually the one that most people are going for, which I can understand. One thing with the Knights that we should quickly talk about, they've conceded the most tries by far to props. So as you can see, 17 tries to middle forwards this season, and Haas was another one last week. So it wouldn't be overly surprising to see someone like a Blake Brayley just have like a crash play, maybe, to like a middle forward this week. So I think Brayley's got a chance of attacking stats this week. Look, if I was making the trade at hooker of Grant out, Brayley is probably who I'd be going for, just given what he's been doing, 5-round average of 76. Sam Verrills has been doing very well and has got a good draw, but in terms of like who I trust more, I probably do trust Brayley, and I trust I trust the Sharks more than I do the Titans. So I would probably have Brayley as number 1. I'd probably put Marshall King as number 2, just given that he has shown the last couple of weeks that ability to score he's got the ability to score tons. He scored a ton on the weekend, and I think even before, if you look at some of his recent scores, 104 in 25, 99 in round 24, and then 106 in round 22. So JMK has gotten almost 3 tons in the last kind of 5 weeks or so. And I think with the game against the Titans this week, for head-to-head purposes, Jeremy Marshall-King or Brayley would probably be where I'd be looking at. Still probably slightly favour Brayley. If you're overall focused and maybe don't need to make a trade at hooker this week and you want to wait a week, Appy Coruscant could be a nice little pod play for you potentially. But that was some of my thoughts for hooker. Sam says, who would have thought that Starling would finish as my hooker number 1? I think it's just been the way that the season has gone, to be honest. Starling's been fine, to be honest. Starling's projected points this week, 57.5. Look, his average in the last 5 rounds, 51. He's been fine. He's been better than Connor Watson. I can tell you that much. As someone who's held Connor Watson all season long, I held him through that entire Origin period with a thing of like, yep, he's the number 1 guy. Don't need to waste trades at hooker, and he has fallen through a cliff. Thankfully, I traded in Brayley for, I think, Kolomatangi via duels a few weeks ago, so I haven't had to play Connor Watson every week. But yeah, again, I feel like I have to apologize. He was a dud buy. He's turned out to be so bad for a hooker replacement, because a lot of people are looking at him post-Origin. Grant has been awful if you traded in last week because he scored 20-something and then misses the next 2 weeks. If you've had Blake Brayley, you're winning here in terms of your hooker position. Am I in any finals? Not really. I'm not in any like real competitive head-to-head leagues, and I don't really worry about head-to-head so much. I think I might be in one with one of the podcasters actually I am. So there is a podcasters head-to-head comp which has got it's got guys like Tim Williams from SC Playbook, Wilfred from the SC Champions, Des from Playbook, Savs from Experience. Yeah, there's a bunch of podcasters. I'm actually in the head-to-head grand final of that one against who am I against? I'm against Walson from SC Playbook. So I'm actually in that head-to-head. I don't think there's no money on the table for that one or anything. So it's just pride. So I'm in the head-to-head final for that. So maybe I'm a chance of that one this week. I think that's literally the only head-to-head final I'm in this week. So I'm in one final, which has got some podcasters. So look, hopefully I can take home the trophy in that one. Although I haven't got a lot of hope based on the way my team looks for this week. All right, that's a little bit on hooker. Let's talk a little bit about captaincy for this week, and we'll talk a bit more about matchups, and then I'll take some of your questions, guys. If you've got more of them coming through, we can be a bit more flexible, look at projector points and whatnot. So for captaincy this week, in terms of earlier in the round vice captains, you've got Jacob Kiraz against a very understrength Penrith Panthers. He's got projected points of 83. Then I had flagged RTS, but I think speaking about it a bit more, I probably wouldn't be putting anything on RTS this week, just given how Parramatta have been defending. Although individually the matchup looks good on paper, because Parramatta have conceded 20 tries to opposing left wingers. I just think, yes, that looks really, really appealing, but they're defending pretty well and they haven't conceded that big ton. So if you're thinking of wanting to get that big 100 plus point score as your VC, I just don't think RTS is probably likely going to deliver that. So I would be looking more at your Kiraz types. Realistically, this week, I've kept it pretty simple. Obviously, there's no Nathan Cleary, so we're not going to be looking at him. Munster is versing the Roosters. Teddy's versing the Storm. Teddy's got projected points of 80, so Teddy could be a safe VC. Even Drinkwater could be one against the Broncos. But for me, what really stood out was the Sharks. So I think Nicho Hynes, highest projected points, 103, playing one of the worst teams for conceding big points. And halfbacks have scored very well against the Knights. If I quickly look back, if I look at the last 5 weeks, in round 20, where was it? There was a week that stood out. 104 Cleary scored against them in round 23. To be fair, they haven't actually conceded that many big points to halfbacks. It's mainly been the fullbacks they've conceded the big points to. But yeah, I think the Knights are definitely there for the taking. So I think Nicho Hynes for me is the standout captain option this week. In terms of weather, I think Sydney should be fine this week. It should be pretty sunny. I think it'll be the same in Townsville as well. Just quickly double checking when teams play in the round, because that is something to factor in. So the Manly Seagulls play Dragons at 5:30 on Saturday. Cowboys play the Broncos at 7:30 on Saturday. Yeah, see, this is the thing. The Sharks play the Knights at 2 p.m. at Shark Park. So 2 p.m. So that's a day game on Sunday. We all know that Sunday afternoon footy is the best footy that you can possibly have. The weather in Sydney looks like it's going to be 19 degrees and sunny on Sunday. So I think to me, it all looks set up for a Sharks captaincy. So I'm pretty much going to be sticking the captaincy, I think, on Nicho. VC, I think, is more likely going to be on a fullback. So I've looked at my team. I don't actually think I can VC Walsh into Hynes, which is very disappointing because I think I want to captain Nicho this week. But Walsh is extremely tempting as well against the Cowboys, but it is away. Same with Turbo. So I think if you've got the option to go VC one of Turbo or Walsh into Hynes, I think that's sweet. If you can actually, say for head-to-head purposes, if you actually got the ability to do a late VC, you can VC Nicho and then maybe go captaincy into one of the Titans players against the Dolphins. Brimson or Campbell. I think Campbell's in for I think Campbell's due at least 110 plus game in the next 2 weeks. So I don't own Campbell, which is scary. But I think Campbell could be someone to consider as well this week against the Dolphins. And I think just broadly on captaincy as well, we saw it on the weekend. Teddy was the most captain player by far and scored only 40 points. There is benefit and merit in being able to vice captain the most popular captain option, just in the event that that captain doesn't score very well. So long as obviously you can make the loop work. But if you can make the loop work, then I think it's a very, very good play. That's what I did on the weekend. I went VC Teddy. I thought Teddy and Walsh were the best captains, but I was able to do the loop. And so I did VC Teddy. Obviously, he scored poorly. And so I thought, okay, no need to worry about that. Leave the captaincy on Walsh. And that was probably one of the biggest things that helped me this week get a green arrow. So I unfortunately can't do Walsh into Hynes, I think, in the way my team's currently set up. So I might have to rethink how I look at captaincy this week. It might just be I might just go VC Kiraz or VC Teddy into Hynes. But yeah, I'm feeling Nicho Hynes, I think, as best captain this week. But yeah, would be curious to see how you guys think about that in the chat as well. In terms of the highest projected points, I've got a little screenshot of that here. It's Hynes, Walsh, Turbo. Then you've got Payne Haas with 85. But I think we're in the season of captain your upside backs and your fullbacks, not necessarily your front rowers. You've got Gagai with 83. I'm not sure if I have got the trust of the Knights to go and put a VC or captaincy on Gagai. Kiraz, I don't mind as an early VC, just given the team that Penrith have put out. And in terms of matchup analysis, Penrith have conceded, to be fair, they've only conceded more of their tries on their left wing. So doesn't necessarily stand out on their right wing, but, Kiraz has got good base stats. So we know that he's someone that is always generally safe, like 60, 70. Then you've got Jamal Fogarty, Hudson Young, Terrell May with 80. Scott Drinkwater still up there with 80, as is Teddy with 80 points as well. So I think that is how the captaincy is shaking out this week. I'm kind of on Nico Hines. Boots is saying, can you show us your team? Honestly, not honestly, but so I reserve showing my team, my full team on Patreon. That's kind of one of the main benefits. Although obviously in the next 2 weeks, once the season's finished, I'll kind of turn the Patreon off in terms of like charging people. Obviously, there's no need to be charging people when there's no SuperCoach game. I know there's SuperCoach finals, but I'm not going to treat that as seriously as I do the normal SuperCoach. But yeah, look, if you want to know my headline players, I've got Walsh, Teddy, and Drinkwater at fullback. Centers, I've pretty much got the stock standard like Lomax, Kiraz, Marky Mark. I do have Toto as a bit of a pod, so I'm missing Toto this week, which isn't great. Then I had Garrick and Gagai, Munster, Hines, and Cleary in my halves. I've got Brayley at hooker. Front row is pretty stock standard as well as Payne Haas, Terrell May, and I think Naff White. And then my second row forward this week is rough because I've had Britton Nickera sitting in there in the subs for weeks. Kikau's missing this week as well, and I'm missing. I think I've got like Tukey Simpkins, so it's a bit of enough. So my starting second row forward this week is and Eli Katoa. I'm missing Eli Katoa this week. So my starting second row forward this week is like Tino, Connor Watson, and Kane Bradley. It's pretty bad. But this is the thing as well. Like, yes, I could make my trade at second row forward and get a better second row forward in. Maybe Hudson Young, who's got the highest projected points here. But just looking at those numbers from earlier, I just want to focus my trades on the backs. That's just where I think these big scores are going to happen. So I'm more interested in, and I've got Garrick to sell. So I think Garrick is more likely who I'll get rid of. Probably Garrick, I think, to one of... I was very keen on Brimson coming into the stream. Benny G in the chats turned me a little bit more onto Eero. I don't hate Hopewadi or Kula as well. I have to give this some thought. I just don't know if I'm putting too much stock into the whole fullbacks versus the Dolphins. They've just conceded so many points to fullbacks in the last few weeks. Like Turbo 180, Walsh 155, Teddy 189. Like what the hell? They've just conceded in the last 3 weeks. Massive scores. I know AJ Brimson isn't on the caliber of these particular guys, but he's still someone who in this season has scored over 100. He scored 100 plus on the Penrith Panthers. So yeah, like, I don't know. I'm kind of thinking about Brimson. His high score last year was 104. The year before that, 94. The year before that was 139. So he can randomly pull out maybe this big score, but I don't know if it's more likely. This is kind of why I was wanting to save my final trade until round 27, because then I was going to trade out Drinkwater when he was on the bye, and I could just bring in anyone. I could bring in Campbell, but I can't probably bring in Campbell this week. So I'm kind of more focusing on centers, and centers is kind of where I'm really focusing my potential trades this round. But yeah, guys, hopefully you all enjoy that. Let's take some questions and then we'll wrap it up. Jason is saying 2 trades left. I have Ellie, Kickout, Dewey, and Edwards. Rough. What do I do? I only have Kane Bradley and Kurt Donahue as backup for second row forward, center wing, and 16 active. What do I do? Yeah, that's rough, Jason. I think, look, with 2 trades left, firstly, are you overall focused or head to head? If you're overall focused, the name that stands out as a sell is Dewey. Given what we've discussed about trying to focus trades on the outside backs, I'd probably sell Adam Dewey for maybe a center that you like, who's got a good next couple of rounds. Maybe it's like an Eero, maybe it's one of the Manly players, maybe it's a Brimson. Because I think what you're going to have next week, and think about this as well for your trades as well, guys, because this is what I went through as well. I looked at my team this week and I thought, okay, it looks pretty rough. Next week though, if we look at some of the matchups for next week, let me just quickly bring them up on my screen. There's some decent matchups next week, and I think if our teams are going to get Eli Katoa back, if you're going to get Cleary, Edwards back, if Kickout comes back as well, then all of a sudden your team's going to look a lot stronger next round, and you're probably not going to be in as bad a position as you are maybe for this round. So if you sell Dewey, who's not going to help you in either round, let's say hypothetically you sold Dewey for, let's say, Euro, you've got a great number for this round, and then next week you've got Edwards back, Eli Katoa back, Kickout back. That's 3 guns that you can fit back into your team. Edwards has the Dragons, so you're absolutely playing him. You play Katoa every week anyway. Kikau you could maybe bench against the Sharks, but Kikau is still a good number. But like next week, there are some good matchups to target. Manly have got the Warriors. Roosters have got the Rabbitohs. So for example, your Roosters players, you're definitely going to want to play like a Mark Nongani to Wasi next week. You're going to want to play all your Penrith players against the Dragons. Any Tigers that you have, they're all going to be playing against the Titans. So yeah, I think, and Parramatta have got Newcastle, so you'll play Lomax every single week, but that might also make you more okay to play a Gagai. I think you're going to find that next week's matchups aren't as bad. Therefore, your team will probably most likely look stronger. I think if you've got like maybe Bulldogs players like Karaz might get a rest next week, or your Raiders players against the Dolphins, but barring that, maybe a Munster for Melbourne. I'm not sure how many restings you're going to see next week. I think this feels like this week is the tough week. So yeah, in your situation, Jason, I would maybe do 1 trade of Dewey out for a centre wing of your choice. And then you can just have a free crack next week. So you keep 1 trade up your sleeve next round. You see what happens. And then you can kind of just reevaluate. And if, for example, if you have Drinkwater, then I would say keep that 1 trade up your sleeve and use that to sell Drinkwater for anyone in flex. For many weeks I've spoken about wanting to maybe get like a Sam Walker. If he's back next week, he's got the Rabbitohs at home, so that could be a good matchup to target. You might want to get a different fullback. Maybe you want to go Turbo. Maybe you want to get like KO Weeks. He's got the Dolphins. I keep harping on about this, but Dolphins to fullbacks, they've leaked a lot of points. So I think for your situation, Jason, if you can just maybe sell Dewey, get a centre in. If you can field a full team, I'd almost keep it that way. Kurt Donahue, I think, is completely fine to play. Kane Bradley's not great, but remember, we've got the flex this year. So, a guy misses out, your lowest score misses out. If that happens to be Kane Bradley, then it's fine. It doesn't actually affect your total team score. Boot says, quick question, 2 trades left. What do I do? Trade Cleary for Nicho Hynes, or Edwards for Reece Walsh, or Harry Grant for, I'm assuming that's Brayley. Look, I wouldn't probably do the Grant for Brayley, just that feels the least upside. Again, are you a head-to-head player, Boots? Because if you're a head-to-head player, you don't have to go and sell Cleary and Edwards. But look, I can understand the appeal. Cleary for Nicho or Edwards for Reece Walsh? I think, given what I've spoken about, I think I'd have to prioritize getting Nicho this week. I just think he could be, I think he's the best captain this week against the Knights. So I think, yeah, Cleary to Nicho. And if you're set on doing the other one, then yeah, it would be Edwards to Reece Walsh. I wouldn't do Grant to Brayley. I think that feels the least upside for me in terms of moves. All right, guys, that's probably all the new questions I can see coming in. So hopefully you all enjoyed that one. A little bit more haphazard, but hopefully you'll all enjoy those numbers that we crunched earlier on teams to target and whatnot. So please give the stream a like if you did enjoy this one. We've got 2 more weeks of NRL SuperCoach to go. In terms of SuperCoach finals and content, I'm not 100% sure if I'll be able to do it just because I'm pretty much going on holiday at the conclusion of the regular season. So I think I'm going away on holiday in like 2 and a bit weeks, and I'm going away for like 2.5 weeks. So I don't know how much content I'll be able to even push out, even when I'm overseas. And in terms of EPL SuperCoach, I had an absolute stinker this week. Captain Haaland, who did nothing. So I might try to get a video out for that this week. I might be able to, hopefully I can get it done Thursday, maybe for a Friday upload. But even that, I'm just going to kind of see how I go with that one. But yeah, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more stuff on EPL SuperCoach, maybe stuff on SuperCoach Finals. Until then, thank you everyone for tuning in. Really, really appreciate it. Good luck in your head-to-head grand finals if you're in them. Good luck for the chase for overall glory if you're overall focused. And we'll see you all in the next one. Cheers.